Your presenters today are Cory Brandl with the La Crosse Police Department, Alicia Place, a school social worker at Emerson Elementary, and Michelle Johnston. She's a supervisor with the CPS Access Unit with the Crosse County Human Services. One quick neat thing that I want to throw out there about this, we've heard about collaboration today, relationships, and this presentation is bringing together the city, with the police, the school district, and also the county, who collaborate pretty largely on the topic they're going to talk about, so enjoy.
We feel like everyone should move to the left, but okay, you can all stay. Okay, so thank you for joining us this afternoon, and hope you guys got outside and got a nice little walk in. I am Alicia Place, the social worker at Emerson. This is my 13th year in the district. The first 6, I was at Southern Bluff, Spence, and Emerson, and then the last 6, going on 7, I have been at Emerson full time. So we're glad you joined us for this presentation. The 3 of us, many of us, feel that this conversation is one that should be had with every person who comes across kiddos in the district. It's one about safety of our kids, right? And as educators, we play a really key role in not only reporting things we see that may seem not okay, but even if we're not the reporter, we can play a really crucial role in being that collateral contact in an investigation if it were to happen. So we've got a lot of good information. Today, the presenters I'm up here with are going to do most of the talking, but like Isaac said, it is really a collaboration. I think as a social worker, it's critical to have people that you can collaborate with, you can network with, people in community agencies that you can call upon when things come up and say, hey, what do you know about this? Or this doesn't seem right, what would you do? And these 2 people here are some of the people that do that for me. One quick story I didn't share in the beginning, I'm going to share right now that Cory doesn't know, but this year I had a mom who had been in a really horribly domestic violence situation, and Dad had recently been released from prison and moved back in the home. And I called Cory just to say, I don't feel good about this. This doesn't feel right. I have nothing I can put my finger on, but it just doesn't feel right. And Cory called me an hour later and said, I walked over to Mom's work. She works at the hotel right down here, and I talked to her. And I talked to her about what trauma looks like in kids and how it can come across different in kids. And I gave her my card in case she ever needs anything, and I just wanted to reach out to her. That is why we collaborate, right? It's important. So, Michelle Johnston, supervisor at La Crosse County, Access Unit. So when we make those reports, make those calls, she has the very difficult decision of making those screening decisions, what we're going to do with that. And she'll go into some of that detail. And then Cory Brandl, investigator with the La Crosse Police Department. He is a police officer. There was a question about that last session, if he really was. But he is. And was an SRO at Longfellow is when I first started working with Cory, and then has been in the sensitive crime unit for a couple of years and has the very difficult task of investigating sensitive crimes, including child abuse. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle. Throughout the presentation, please feel free to ask questions. We have time at the end for that as well, but we welcome questions that you may have.
Thanks. So the first slide that you're going to see are some of our 2016 statistics. Hopefully my voice hangs out through all of this with allergy season. We had about 1,400 reports last year. That means 1,400 different people called to make reports about kids in the community that they were worried about. Of those 1,400 reports, almost 500 of them were assessed by workers in my unit. So that means the report came in. I felt like almost 500 of those reports met the criteria needed for us to go out and work with families, help families, assist families, so that hopefully whatever brought them to my doorstep doesn't happen again. Then, of those 500 cases, at least 70 of them had some kind of longer-term intervention with our agency through our ongoing services unit. Whether that was court intervention or voluntary, a voluntary provision of services, 70 families received long-term care or assistance from our agency. Throw up there the mandated reporting law. Really all that says is that as educators, as people working with children, even if you're not directly a teacher, if through the course of your employment you come in contact with children and learn about either suspected, threatened abuse or neglect, or actual abuse or neglect that has occurred, you must report that. Just because the law says you would report that, you're going to have to. It might be hard. You might not like it. You might feel a little uneasy about that. However, if you don't, there are some potential consequences to that to you. You could be taken to court. You could be given a fine, potentially even jail. I say that not to scare you necessarily, but to let you know there are consequences for not reporting. That's also why we ask for your name when you report, so that you get credit for that, making that report as a mandated reporter. In the school district of La Crosse, and in most school districts throughout this county, they have said, like, you as the teacher or you as the person who gets this disclosure from the child or has these concerns should be making that report. We like when the direct person makes the report, because the information that you have is so much better than if you tell someone else who then has to call us or tell two other people. You know, by then the information may have gotten lost in the telephone game as well. I know Alicia and many of the other social workers in the schools and counselors in the school are very good about doing that call with you to give you that support and then process things afterwards. So it's not that the support isn't there, it's there. We just want you to make that call yourself. Okay? So just like the law says you have to report, they'll stand behind you also. So you can't lose your job. You can't be disciplined by that. As long as you're making the report in good faith. So as long as you have a strong concern or conviction that you think something has happened or will happen to this child, you will be protected by the law. Further, if the family, although they may say in the heat of the moment, I'm going to sue you, they can't and won't, and the law will stand behind you for that as well. Okay?
So, Child Protective Services, they, by law, can't disclose the information of who had reported. Law enforcement, we don't abide by, we don't have those same regulations. However, we will, at all costs, try and prevent any of that information coming out. Typically, it does not. We understand, just as a team, as we usually investigate these types of cases, the importance of the trusting relationships you have in the classroom, in the schools, with the students. So you have that trusting relationship, they disclose to you, and then you report it, which sometimes can be tough. So it's paramount for us when we do our investigations to just deflect. Parents will typically say, when you show up at the door, hey, who called? Where is this coming from? And the automatic response is always, well, I play dumb. I do a really good job of that. We just say, look, I don't know where it came from, but here's the deal. There's a concern about your child. You are concerned as their parent. We are as well. We're going to look into it. And then we'll cover all the bases of physical abuse, sexual abuse, just so that they can't typically narrow it down to what the concern is. However, if they have a bruise or a mark, maybe typically like on the face, for example, and then the kid comes home from school and there's a mark on the face, they're obviously going to know what the concern is. But we really try and deflect as to where it came from. If a parent or care provider has an idea of who reported, we just deflect and say, listen, they have to. They're mandated reporters, so they have to report it. So typically that will deflect a lot of that concern when making the report.
Going along with that, as CPS workers, when we go out and knock on homes too, it's not that we're saying, hey, Alicia Place called us today, or your son's teacher called us today. They're worried about you. We very much try to leave things very open-ended with them. We're never going to say, yes, it was them either. We also can't stop them from putting two and two together. So kind of like Cory said, you know, if we're showing up at their door at 9:30 and the only other place this kid has been is on the school bus and at school, they're probably going to put it together. There's not much we can do about that, but we're never going to say, you're right, it was Alicia Place or it was your son's teacher who called us. All right, so we're going to move through these next few slides very quickly. I'm going to give you the definitions of the different types of abuse. For sure, stop me if you have questions about that. As you can see up there, sexual abuse is defined as sexual intercourse, contact, exploitation, forced viewing of pornography, or engaging a child in child prostitution. About 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys has had some kind of sexual abuse type experience before they turn 18. We're trying to get away, especially in terms of sexual abuse, from the words stranger danger, because as you can see, 2/3 of those abused sexually have been so by somebody that they trust, whether that's a relative or somebody that they know really well. So that doesn't necessarily hold true in terms of sexual abuse. Here in La Crosse County, we take our sexual abuse and really significant physical abuse cases to a place called Stepping Stones. It's housed in the Family and Children's Center building on Main Street. If you're not familiar with that building, it is a place where we can, in a very child-friendly atmosphere, interview the child. The interview is then videotaped. It's also observed from another room by law enforcement, sometimes the DA, and other professionals that we work with, so that hopefully, once that child tells their story in that interview room, they might not ever have to tell it again unless they want to. So that can generally be used in a court hearing as well, that videotape. So here is a list of some of the different types of signs that may lead you to believe a child is being sexually abused. These are for sure not the be-all and end-all of signs. So if they have significant behavioral change, if they're flat out disclosing something happened, or if physically, they're starting to wet again after they had not wet for a while, if they're playing with their genitals, those kind of things, not in and of themselves are indicative of sexual abuse, but if you put all of that together with other things that you know, and you think, this might fit based on clues that they've given me, then you might have sexual abuse. Those in and of themselves, not necessarily indicative. Emotional abuse is a pretty hard one for us to get involved in. It's even harder for us to take to court and have some kind of long-term involvement win. So we have to have a very significant change in a child's psychological or intellectual functioning, and then be able to say that the parent has been offered services for that and has refused or neglected for reasons other than poverty to be able to rectify that situation or that change in the child's functioning. Next, we're going to get into physical abuse. I will let you know ahead of time, there are pictures of different physical abuse injuries. They could be a little difficult to watch. So physical abuse has to be some kind of injury, significant injury to a child that has occurred and wasn't an accident. So severe or frequent bruising, cuts, lacerations, broken bones. In babies, what we call shaken baby syndrome, other significant internal injuries. So especially young kids and toddlers tend to get accidental injuries on the harder surfaces of the body, so the bony parts of the body, because that's generally where they fall, and injuries will occur. Suspicious injuries, though, occur generally on the fattier areas of the body and areas that are covered up, as you can see in those pictures, by clothes. Here is a child who was whipped by some kind of looped instrument, whether that was an electrical cord or a belt or a rope or something like that. The scab is where the buckle went into the child. Clearly that was not done accidentally, because there's a pattern to the injury and there was multiple areas on the body where he was injured. Here's an example of a slap to the face. A slap to the face with all of those kind of linear parallel markings wouldn't necessarily happen accidentally. You'd have to hit a child pretty hard in order for that to occur. Bite marks get a little difficult for us. As you know, typically around 1 and 2 is where kids in daycares especially, or siblings, like to bite one another as a form of communication because they don't have those verbal skills yet. So this is where you're going to have to take into account family circumstances, what else you know about them, or if it doesn't appear to be a child-sized mouth, right? If it's a bigger bite, it probably came from an adult, and it's very unlikely that an adult could accidentally bite someone, causing that significant of an injury. Here are some cases where we had some questionable bruising, and then through more talking with parents and other people involved in the family, we found out the real story. So a child that young, it's not on the left likely that they would get that kind of injury and that amount of bruising from just rolling over gently onto a pacifier. This, I don't really remember what this woman said, but it was determined based on a doctor's examination and other things that it was certainly not what mom had said happened. The one on the right here eventually admitted to pinching, but at first said the child got those injuries from tickling. We don't see a lot of burns these days, but those are actually abusive cigarette burns on the left. They're abusive because they're perfectly circular. Somebody would have had to take a cigarette and hold it onto the person's arm in order for that perfect circle to appear like that. If you're brushing against a cigarette, it would have more of a rash type, longer burn to the arm. Those we were never able to determine whether they were abusive or not. They were from a radiator, but it was not clear whether the child fell back into the radiator or was pushed into the radiator. So in general, when you see an injury, I wouldn't want you to necessarily call us right away just because you see some kind of bruise or injury to a child. We'd want you, and we'll learn in a little bit how we would want you to talk to that child about that, but we'd want you to get some circumstances and figure out what's going on around that so that you can be able to know, this is accidental, I'm not going to call it in now, or nope, this was a really purposeful event and I do need to call it in because it's abusive. So ask them a little bit about their story. Again, we'll talk to you about some questions that you can use and some things that you can say to find out about that story. Does it seem to fit with this child and what you know about them? Is there a pattern in the location of injury? Is there multiple injuries? Are they acting differently today than they normally are? If you can observe the injury, great, because we'll want you to give us a description of that, but if you can't, I would not be asking them to lift up clothes, take off clothes, or anything like that. I can't even do that. I have to take them to a doctor to be looking in those areas. If the child's saying they got hit in the head, and right now it's just kind of a red spot around their eye or on their cheek, are you having trouble seeing today? And, observe them and observe the way they're walking, talking, and acting to be able to give us that description. Now we'll move into neglect. So the failure, refusal, or inability of a caretaker for reasons other than poverty to provide the very most basic needs of food, clothing, shelter, medical or dental care, and then that lack of care needs to seriously endanger their physical health. So there's physical health, which we also call environmental health. So this is where you kind of think like dirty houses. There's also the lack of supervision. There's medical neglect. So that is also typically called in by our doctors and medical providers. That would be a child who is very severely ill, and for whatever reason the parent is not getting them adequate medical care and they're at risk of probably death. And then for our babies, the failure to thrive once they leave the hospital, malnutrition. These are a house that we went to in 2006. I also went back into that house and investigated that house about 4 years later, and it was in almost the same condition. So this is environmental neglect. Clearly, this is not a suitable living environment for any child. Our response time to a house like this, though, is very different if it's teenagers living in the home versus 0, 2, 3, 4-year-olds who could easily get into that, ingest things. You could probably move through these other pictures. This is all the same house. Clearly, that's much more dangerous for a younger child than it is for an older child. But I think if you saw something like that, we'd be in the house no matter what the age of the child is. Neglect also takes the form of parental drug use, either through parental drug use, their sales, manufacturing drugs within the home. What's difficult for us, although drugs are illegal no matter what they are, marijuana or not, we have to be able to have information that indicates the parent's functioning is diminished to such a degree that the child's physical safety is being compromised. So just the fact that mom is using drugs or smoking marijuana at night doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be able to get involved. We'd have to have other information about how these children are in danger just because she's using marijuana. Once we get involved, we typically do hair follicle testing on kids if the parents will allow it. So that's where we'll take them in to the clinic. The doctors will cut off a little bit of the hair in the back of their head underneath, and then they send that in for testing. That can tell us what kind of drugs are in their system, which then kind of helps us to talk and work with parents. The difficult thing about that is that we can't really tell how much they've been exposed to, because the levels could be high because parents are smoking a lot, or they could be high because they've used over a long period of time. So it's helpful for us to know that kids have been drug exposed. It's not necessarily as helpful to say, like, yes, you were using last night, Mom, because their levels are so high. Right now, almost a little over 60% of the cases in our ongoing unit have some kind of alcohol or drug component in them, which to me seems a little low because it seems like every report I read has some kind of alcohol or drug component to it. But we've looked at the stats, and that's kind of where it's at right now. The last type of abuse is threatened abuse or neglect. This is super gray, not only for you guys, but also for us. This is where something hasn't yet happened to the child, but you really feel strongly that something will happen to this child. So this is a lot where we get reports of the kids are saying they're being spanked as a form of discipline, but there's never been an injury, they've never disclosed an injury. That's kind of what we determined to be threatened physical abuse. Same thing with neglect, like, we often say threatened abuse for neglect, like mom's leaving but leaves her 12-year-old in charge of her 3 younger siblings. Again, probably not great, but unless we have information that says like the 12-year-old is delayed and functions like a 6-year-old, those are things that are kind of hard and gray for us to be able to get involved in. That's where we need a lot of details about the family and about the worries with the family. So we've kind of given you a lot of the different definitions, so you know kind of what we're looking for. Once you feel like, this could be abusive, we want you to ask more questions, but we don't necessarily want you to get into an investigation. So a couple years ago, we found the Safe, Simple, Smart interview. This is something that somebody who isn't trained forensically or through law enforcement techniques to interview people, so people like teachers and other kind of caregivers can use to be able to get the information that you're going to need to give us a call. It was developed by a whole collaboration of different disciplines from law enforcement, social work staff, child advocacy staff, school staff on the east side of the state, and then they put it out to the rest of us. Really what we want you to do is give this child a little bit of an interview so that you know that you have enough information to have a legitimate worry to be able to call us. So you'll be conducting this type of interview before you make a report, and it gives you information to know whether, I have enough time to make a report, or nope, I better be calling Cory and his friends right away to get somebody over here. So at the end of this, you'll have accurate information. You'll have gotten that by using a child-friendly process and non-leading questions. Step 1 is to make the room or wherever you're, the location, a safe environment for the kids. And Alicia can talk to you a little bit about like what happens when you're in the middle of class having a discussion and kids blurt something out. That's probably not where you're going to want to conduct this interview, because that child's peers and everyone else in the room doesn't need to hear about the nitty-gritty details. But we want you to then try to get away with the child and let them just vomit out everything that they need to tell you. And they can use whatever words they want. We don't want you to interrupt them if possible, and just let them get it out. So if you want to.
Sure. So a few years ago, a kindergarten teacher had her class come back in from recess, and one of the little girls, once they were all sitting at the carpet getting ready for the afternoon, one of the little girls raised her hand and said, "At recess, Sally told me she has to kiss her dad's pee-pee." And the teacher's immediate response was, "That's inappropriate, and we do not talk about that at school." It's understandable. The teacher was thrown off guard, was not expecting that to be shared, of course. But in that message of saying that's not appropriate, we don't talk about that at school, the message it gave the girl who disclosed was it's inappropriate and we don't talk about that. So a report was made, and when they came to investigate the next day, the little girl wouldn't share anything. And I know Cory has a similar example. I think that as teachers, sometimes kids do say things that really make us like stop and whoa, what do I say next, right? And your mind can spin, and it's amazing what we think of in a split second of all the scenarios that go through our head. I think a really important thing to do is just be, first of all, really affirming, and then make sure to let them know that you really want to talk to them about it. So often when I'm teaching guidance and protective behaviors, it just happened again this year, someone raised their hand in the middle of class, and well, when my mom gets mad, she pulls my hair and spanks me. And then of course other kids are like, what? Because for some kids that is unheard of. So saying something like, I'm so glad you shared that with me, and I really want to talk to you more about that in a minute. Letting them know that it's okay that they shared, you want to hear more, but you want to do it in private, and then try to have that minute happen as soon as possible. And Michelle and Cory will reiterate this idea of time frame can be critical. So At Emerson, I say to teachers a lot of times, if you can get a hold of me and if I can come cover your class while you make the report, or they run something by me and I say that probably can wait till you're prep, that's fine, you can make the call then. Because response time varies depending on what we have to report. But when a kiddo shares something with you, I think being affirming, thanking them for sharing it with you, and then letting them know that you do want to talk about it more, and then give them a private area to do that in.
I think building off of that, what I can say is that, again, having that report as soon as possible helps us to be able to have the time to look at history with the family, to make the best decisions possible that we can. There are legitimately times where all of a sudden it's 2:15 and a child blurts something out and there's no way around that. But I think what I can say is it's really hard all around for the investigation when we have to run out there to try to stop a kid from getting on a bus, because then they get really heightened and anxious about, crap, I'm going to get it 10 times worse than I got it last night because I'm not getting on off that bus when my parent expects me to, and so then they're going to be wondering, like, what's going to happen to me. So we have found, if at all possible, if we can get that information as soon as we can, we hopefully can start that investigation process, have that kid stay in school or get them to medical if they need it, or get them to the CAC, and then even go talk to the parent before we have to start making decisions about whether or not that kid should even get on the bus to go home. Because kids have shut down on us and said, nope, I don't know what you're talking about, nothing happened, when we've had to do that super last minute stuff because they know if they don't get off that bus, it's going to be worse for them. So once you've gotten them to a place where things are quiet and calm and you can have a good conversation, start it by asking open-ended questions. I think you could lead with, hey, when we were in circle time, you blurted out this, tell me more about that. And then as they talk, if they're starting to slow down, you could say, tell me more, or what happened next. Keep things super open, so really, hopefully, you're not having to talk all that much, and you're just getting their word vomit and their dialogue about whatever it is that did occur in the home. You don't have to get a ton of detail. It is helpful to know if anybody else saw that, because then we can go to the other sibling schools and talk to them if we need to. But it allows them to kind of talk in their own words. You don't have to interject. You don't have to ask leading questions or have the risk of asking a leading question when you don't even mean it. But we also want you to clarify. So if they're saying, I had sex with my brother last night, sometimes sex means something to you that it means different to Alicia, to Cory, to everyone else. So we would want you what does that mean in your family? Tell me more about that. Those kind of things. Same thing with different types of physical abuse and stuff like that. We also don't want you to necessarily assume that it isn't true if they decide not to tell you more about that. It just means maybe they're not ready to talk about it yet, but you should still probably call and make a report. Again, we don't want you to ask leading questions, so I wouldn't start off with, hey, I see that bruise on you. Did Dad give it to you? Or Mom, or whoever. Those are some other examples up there. We also, like I said before, don't want you taking pictures of things, walking into homes, or asking children to view private areas of their body or take off clothes. If they offer to say, oh yeah, it's right here on the middle of my back, and they're already lifting up their shirt, there's nothing really you can do about that. I don't know that I would specifically, though, ask them to lift up their shirt to see something on the middle of their back. Again, you'd want to know if somebody else is there. Did those people see something? And if your child isn't injured but is talking to you like, hey, my mom and dad got in a fight last night, the police came, it's okay. Hey, what else happened? Tell me what you saw. That is good information for us to know as well, even if they weren't necessarily injured because of the domestic violent incident that happened. In the end, those are some of the things that you're going to want to know. So really, it's a lot of the questions that we're asking you when you make that phone call. What happened in a very general and broad sense? Who was there? When is that person going to be next at your house if it's not somebody that lives in their house? That also helps us determine response time. If it was Uncle Gary and they don't see him again until the weekend, we might not have to run out there right away that day that you make the phone call. We might be able to be a little more planful with the family, and go at a time that's a little more convenient for them. We also would like to know about time if it didn't happen just the night before. Kids usually work well with, did it happen on a school night? Was it on a weekend? Those kind of things. What was on TV if you're not sure of time of day, if they were watching TV, those stuff like that. It's okay if they don't know the answer. We are frequently saying to kids, I just want to know what happened. If you don't know, that's okay to tell me you don't know. Lets them know that they don't have to make things up. I think we already covered the other ones. That's okay. So once you've gotten all the information that you need, it's okay to end the interview with the child. You don't have to keep them talking forever. We typically say end the interview when the child's done talking and once you know that you have enough information. Thank them then for coming to you to talk to you about this. And then we usually close even in our interviews with kids, like, thanks for telling me, if I'm not here or if Mrs. Place isn't here, who could you talk to again if something like this happened at home? Allows them to start thinking of who are other safe people that I can talk to. I think you usually do some safety planning stuff with kids, right, when you talk to them?
Yeah, that is a really good question. You guys jump in too. I guess what I was going to say from an elementary perspective is when I'm having conversations with kids, often I start it with, like, if I think you're being heard, I might have to tell other adults who can help us. Because teachers will say to me, they told me not to tell, or I don't want to lose their trust, or I promised them. Never promise that you won't tell, because you can't keep that promise, right? So I do often will say, like, to my elementary kiddos, there's other adults I work with who can maybe help your family, and I'm going to have to tell them. Do you want to jump in middle school?
I think just anytime anybody's like, oh, you called the cops on me, and they just get paranoid, like somebody's going to get arrested. It's a very trusting environment, and we want to continue that. So we'll just come in and diffuse it and continue. Like, listen, they had to report it. Here's the plan. And I'll typically communicate the plan going forward with the middle schooler or high schooler as well. Like, hey, listen, this is the plan. These are things that I have to do, just so that they're aware of what I'm going to do, who I'm going to talk to before we leave. It's a case by case on what that plan may entail, but it's important to communicate and kind of empower them as well. Like, hey, listen, this is what you told me, this is what I have to do, but these are some options. Because they've disclosed once, we want them to continue to talk to you, because chances are it could be just a trial disclosure where it's just a minimal thing like this, I was touched inappropriate. Well, maybe there's continued sexual assault that they don't want to talk about. So they just want to see that you're trusting what's going to happen, and then stuff may come later. So it's important. But thanks, good question.
Great.
All right. So again, we want you to end the interview, and just because the longer kids keep talking, sometimes they become more suggestible. They often then start to retell their story, but it might not be the same story, and so we don't want to get them confused. We don't want them to come off as not as credible down the road. So really, it's just staying in that moment and getting the information you need, and then trying to end that as soon as possible. You do have the option of reporting to CPS or law enforcement. Most often when you do that, they also tell you to call us, so you can just start with us. However, if there is some kind of immediate safety risk, your first call should be to the police. They can get there much quicker than we can. They'll get out there and assess things, and if they feel they need us right away, they'll then call us and we can get there. Make the report as soon as you have enough information. Don't wait till the end of the workday if possible. Like Alicia said, most buildings are very good about finding someone to cover your room if you feel you need to go do that right now. So you're going to call the little number on those orange cards. If you didn't have one on your chair, they were also out on the table, and there's more on the in the doorway out there. But you're going to call that number. You're going to get the La Crosse County Human Services front desk. You're going to tell them you need to make a CPS report, and then you'll get to one of my two staff. They're going to start asking you a bunch of questions. I want you to know that that is a two-way street, so you are also more than welcome to ask them questions back if you're not understanding what they're asking you. They're really going to want to know the rundown. So who is this child? What's their date of birth? All of those things. Who else is in the house? What do you know about the maltreatment? What are your worries? You'll hear that a lot from them. What are your worries about this family? You'll also hear too, though, what's working well, and have you tried to address this problem with the family before, and what's your reaction going to be, or what's their reaction been, sorry. Have you had concerns about this before, but not enough that you felt you needed to report? We kind of want to know how long this has been a worry for you, or your whole entire school. Again, who is this person that has done this kind of maltreatment? When are they going to be around them again? We also want to know, is the child a verbal child? Do they have some kind of special need? Those help us know whether we need some kind of interpreter or what it's going to be like when we meet with this kid for the first time. What else do we want to know? We really want to have all of the information that you know about this family. The more information we have, which is why we ask a ton of questions, the easier it is for us to start engaging and building rapport the minute we hit the door or we hit the school to talk to these kids and families. We're working on a new rollout within CPS called Signs of Safety. It really, again, is about the family engagement. So you'll hear us asking you scaling questions. It's okay if you don't know or don't feel comfortable. Well, we're trying to get a read from you. How big of a worry is this for you? Like, do you feel this child shouldn't go home because this is such a significant worry? Or do you feel like, this child could go home tonight, but I'm worried this might play out in a day or two? Those kind of things. Again, if you've tried to address these concerns, this most often happens in like the physical neglect, filth and squalor situation. So if you've called mom and said, hey, your son is awfully tired all the time, he's coming to school and he smells, his clothes are dirty. If you've tried to address that, we want to know what kind of response you've gotten back. Again, that in and of itself, a child with dirty clothes isn't necessarily a CPS report, but it's helpful for us to know that you've addressed some concerns that you've had and parents' response and what they've done about it. Like I said, it's a two-way street, so ask us questions. You can ask us, what do you think might happen? My workers can't necessarily give you a guarantee whether or not we're going to respond, but they can talk to you in generalities. Like when we've seen a report like this before, we have done something about this, or maybe we haven't, or those kind of things. They can also talk to you about, have you considered a children with special needs report? There's some of those workers here in this presentation too. If the child has a diagnosis and some significant behavioral problems, that unit can come in and work voluntarily with the families to provide some supports to hopefully maybe get things under control a little bit. They can't control for safety, but they can provide the family some resources. Once you make the report, I have to make a decision whether it meets the criteria of the things that we talked about before of us being able to intervene. If we can't intervene, you should get a letter within the first 5 days or so of making the report. But if we screen it in, then you'll get a letter at the end of the assessment period. You will likely know that it's screened in sooner than that, though, because we'll probably, hopefully, be calling you to get collateral information about other questions that we may have about the family and their functioning. So if I screen it out, meaning we can't get involved right now, it stays in our database, which is a statewide database, so I can see if this is a very transient family between counties and other counties may have had or other worries that may have popped up for them. I also send things to Community Response, which is a voluntary agency that is housed out of the Parenting Place. They can go out and make some contact with families and link them up to various resources and services within the community. If it's screened in, it goes down one of two pathways, our traditional response and our alternative response. So traditional response is most often when we team with Cory and various law enforcement personnel. Those are always sexual abuse cases which are teamed with them because there's the potential obviously for charges for the perpetrator. Also really significant physical abuse cases. We team with them. Drug cases, a lot of times we team with them. Not only for our own safety, but just because of the nature of drugs. What else do I need to say about that? Any questions about that? The screening or the response end of things? Yeah?
So we have a child that's going to be moving out of our district, and we're very concerned. And we know already CPS is involved in that area.
Yeah.
This screening, they'll see this when they move to their new community in Wisconsin.
If we have an open case, yes, that new community once a report is made down there, Yes, that CPS agency will look up their name and see all of their prior history and all of the work that has been done with them. If they have an open CPS case here, though, we would keep that open and transfer it to that new county, so they'll know sooner rather than later. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know in the past when I've had students move to new communities, I've called that new county, even if we didn't have an open case, and said, we had lots of concerns here. This is just a heads up. There's not confidentiality in doing that. If you are, again, making that in good faith to say to this new county, you might, we're just worried about this kiddo or the new school. Certainly we've called the school social worker or counselor at the new school. So that'd be another way to get them to tap into the Swiss Aqua system we have and see the whole history. And that's the thing too, sometimes even if you feel like you don't have all that information we talked about, it's okay to make a report because sometimes Michelle already has a whole bunch of information, and this little piece that you provide is like, oh, that was the linking piece we've been missing, or the straw that broke the camel's back. So don't feel like if you didn't get this whole wonderful disclosure, it's not worth reporting. Sometimes just information that you can provide is what they need. And one other thing that I just randomly thought of as you were talking is sometimes kids will give us street names of boyfriends. Cory knows those people. He can look them up and find out who these people are by that street name. So it's okay to say, like, they call them this. I don't know who that is. That's okay. Give Michelle that information because Cory and his crew can help us with that.
So I'm a preschool teacher, and sometimes we get used to this, but as a teacher, you figure that, the parents, you break the families apart. It happens, and then the parents will come in and threaten you and things like that. Like, what can you do to keep your mind off of that stuff? Because, it's really frightening because the only adult that sees outside, but I'm a family.
Yeah, typically, even little ones will come with disclosures. There's probably a lot more going on. So it's important to get the report in, and then we will team it and continue to work with the family and just really diffuse all the focus of where it came from, and just kind of just work with the family. Just for instance, like a case like that where a little one comes forward and the parent's really upset, we'll just go through and say, listen, the teacher's a mandated reporter. We won't identify which teacher, and then sometimes they'll just throw a curveball and say, listen, they had this class today, or they were out on the playground and they saw another staff member. I'm going to do everything I can to diffuse it from the primary teacher, or whichever one it was, because we don't want any retaliation. Sometimes, and then parents are pretty receptive to it. You can really redirect a lot of times with parents, and just to cooperate with an investigation. And I will just tell parents, like, listen, we got this report, we're going to investigate, and it's going to prove either factual or non-factual, and whether or not there's a concern here. Someone had a concern, they reported it, and we're going to look into it. You try and diffuse it, but if it continues and they say, and sometimes parents will come through and say, they'll just lie and say, yeah, the investigator told me that you're the one who called. Well, no, and we'll communicate ahead of time, like, hey, this parent's really upset. I didn't tell him that you reported. I told him this. That maybe somebody else or somebody on the playground or in the cafeteria maybe reported it. And then just so parents don't have any idea where it came from. But yeah, it's a good question.
And just to add to that, in the 13 years I've been in the district, I can think of 3 times a parent has come back pretty upset. I don't know if there's administrators in the room, but that's why they get paid the big bucks, like, to handle that usually. But there have been plenty of parents that know I have been the one that called, and it's just about rebuilding that relationship sometimes. But you don't ever have to confirm or deny either. If they were to approach you and say, like, I heard you called, or I know you called, you can always play dumb and, just say, everyone here is a mandated reporter and your kid comes across lots of people. I guess I'm not sure what you're talking about. I really would just stick with that. And then direct them to your administrator. Because I don't want you're the one with the relationship. You want the kid to come back and to keep talking to you. So, yeah.
We usually have a really good idea before we end the contact with the parent, whether or not it's going to be applicable.
Yeah.
And if they do, we're going to let you know.
Yeah.
We'll usually refuse consent to the administrator right away.
Yeah.
So how about, the families that are already in the CPS system, and then they share with you, well, I recommended
Yeah.
tend to see that a little bit in our population.
Mm-hmm.
Our school is, there's that tendency to try to keep everything secret just so you can stay with your mom or your dad or in your family situation.
Yeah.
Kids are really wise to it.
They are. They are.
I mean, once they've been in the system, they know you're not going to report.
Right. And I think, too, from our perspective, that's why we're really trying to move away and shift from these cold knocks on the doors and taking your kids before we've heard your story, because that does perpetuate that. And so I guess I don't know what you would say back to that, but I think my response to that would be like, you know, they really want, social services really wants to help you. They're going to try to keep you with your family as much as possible. We do everything we can to try to keep kids with families. I mean, we've had same-day responses where the kid has had a significant injury and still sent that kid home, even if the maltreater's in the home. We've just done a whole lot of planning, and that's probably been our whole entire day, meeting with different relatives and neighbors to find out, like, who could we have coming to check on them every hour on the hour to make sure things aren't blowing up. I mean, if we have to send in paid providers, we do. But we would prefer to use people that the family knows as long as they're appropriate and they check out. So it really is it's very hard, and our judges have wised up to this now too. Like, they're questioning us more than ever when we take a kid into court because we've removed them. So it's really the last thing on our mind, because that is also, like you said, very traumatic. You know, they love and they care for these parents, and on some level they trust them even though they've hurt them, but they also don't want to be away from them either. So I think it's providing that reassurance in whatever language you know how to best interact with that kid of, I hope that that's the last response you get from CPS. They're going to work really hard to keep you in your home and keep you safe.
And I think that's also been a response I've had to parents who have questioned me, because they question me about that, is I will say to them, like, CPS has this reputation for just coming and taking your kids, but really these social workers want to work with you. They have resources that can help you. I work with them. It'll go so much easier if you just work with them and see what they maybe have to offer your family, and a lot of times that helps diffuse it too. So.
Yeah, I mean, the dirty house pictures I showed you before, the filth and squalor, that's really a symptom of a whole larger issue with that family, right? I mean, the house doesn't get that way just because the kids don't throw anything in a garbage can. It's because there's some kind of drug or alcohol or mental health issue on the part of the parents that hasn't been addressed, and things have just deteriorated in the home. That's why I went back in there 4 years afterwards. You know, we made her clean up her house the first time, and in the old school CPS way, we just, oh, you cleaned up the house, great, your case is closed, we'll give you your kids back. Well, then we have 4 years later, and it's returned to the same spot because we didn't assist or offer mom services to get to the bottom and the root issue of things. So that's why we're really trying to have as much information up front in the report to hit the ground running with engaging with the family. That's why we really try to get away from the cold knock and saying, hey, there are people in the community that have a lot of worries about your family. Let's sit down and address this. My hope is at the end of that, we don't have to come back to that house again. Chances are we might, but the hope is there that we wouldn't have to.
Last slide. You're almost done. Hang in there. It's a heavy hour. So law enforcement, when we'll get a call from CPS if the report comes in that way, and we'll team it. We'll team the investigation. We'll work together. Ultimately, they need resources, like Michelle had said, but ultimately somebody else could have some legal consequences. So we'll go in and we just want to find supporting facts. If a little one discloses, we want to try and find as much supporting evidence that we can. One point I really want to touch on, just with little elementary age kids, it's important. Timing is really important. We had a case several years ago where a girl had disclosed to staff, a staff member, that sexual abuse concerns. The staff member had reported it, I believe it was at the very end of the day or the following morning, I can't remember. We didn't get it till the next morning. By the time we got out, the little girl had gone home from school, stayed with the maltreater, and had disclosed to the maltreater, hey, I talked to somebody at school today, and mentioned what happened. By the next morning, the girl came back to school and would not disclose anything, wouldn't talk, was coached. Therefore, our hands are tied. We had to return her to that environment until we're able, there's other resources we can bring in, but if there's no disclosure to us, our hands are tied as well. So timing is really, really important to get us notified. And the best case scenario is if there's a disclosure made at school, we can get to the school and interview the little ones before they have to go home. Because if they have to go home, then we are knocking on the door and the parents are like, why are you here? And even seeing a minimal, maybe aggressive, tone towards us or whatever it may be, the parents are like, the children pick up on that and don't end up wanting to talk with us. So it's really important to get those reports in early as you can. So like I said, law enforcement, our role, we're going to find as many facts as we can, and then we're going to turn our investigation over to the district attorney's office. We have a really supportive district attorney's office here in La Crosse. We're really fortunate. They're pretty aggressive with these types of cases, but it takes a lot. And just because we get involved with a family and there is no criminal consequence, there's tons of resources that come out of it, and at least the parents know that they're not going to continue to get away with it, whatever it may be. We also, just middle school, high school age, in my office, like I mentioned, I'm a sensitive crimes investigator. There's 3 of us. We have seen a dramatic increase in like blackmail cases where, for instance, a girl would send an inappropriate or nude photo to another male student, and then it just escalates from there. Well, send me more, or else I'm going to put it on Facebook. Send me more, I'm going to put it on Snapchat. And it just continues to escalate to the point of sexual favors or whatever it may be. Tons of those cases. We want to know about those cases. There's lots of stuff we can do, especially, if they're doing it to one girl, they're probably doing it to a handful of others at least. And we need to stop those cases. Those cases happen, we investigate them, they're charged, but they don't make the news because they're juveniles. So you don't hear about them. It's out there and it's happening a lot. So please get those reports in. Even if you've got a girl who comes in and says, uncomfortable, is upset by what's happening, if you can get that name and we can try and at least interview at the school, and maybe they're not comfortable right away, but give me a chance to come in and talk to her and at least explain what the investigation will look like. The misconception is we're going to go in there, we're going to go to his house and arrest him right away or whatever it may be. In reality, that's not the case. I would love to, but sometimes we can't and our hands are tied. But just because a charge doesn't come right away, we're going to address it, and it happens. So I think that's most of what we have for you. Thanks again, especially after lunch, an hour of heavy topic. We appreciate you hanging out. So if there's any questions, don't hesitate. Our information's there. Those are direct numbers. Please don't hesitate to call. Questions come up all the time, and I'm happy to field those questions at any time. So thanks again. We appreciate it.